there are literal things or direct statements made, it doesn't mean that there is an absence of emotion. It is often indicative of the presence of a lot of emotion previously. This song really does give me strong hometown vibes. It's like a dance between sadness and etherealness. Hashtag multitasking. Gen Z, do y'all still write hags and kit? The word anyway messes with me a lot, like a lot. According to the most ancient text, urbandictionary.com, it's not so much about nostalgia, it's more just about... Hi everyone, welcome to this video. On my channel, I analyze song lyrics very in depth through the lens of literary analysis. I am like embarrassingly late to the party. I have started listening to Phoebe Bridgers. I know, I'm sorry. Don't at me. Like, I know she's had albums out for a while. I love her music so much. I'm gonna talk a little bit about how my life is different now. Like, her music literally changed my life, and I'm not just saying that to be dramatic. So today we're gonna be analyzing the song Scott Street by Phoebe Bridgers. As a quick disclaimer, everything presented in this video is my own personal opinion. Music is very subjective. Everyone's gonna have their own unique take on it, and I always encourage you guys to tell me what your perspective is down below in the comments. I really value words, so in my analyses I tend to concentrate on diction, which is word choice, and connotation, which can be thought of as the vibes or the emotions that the words elicit. Before we begin, please make sure to subscribe, and if at any point in the video you're like, OMG, I'm enjoying this, please make sure to like this video. Let's get started. I always have timestamps below, so feel free to skip this part, but I just feel the need to explain why I am like respectfully obsessed with Phoebe Bridgers right now. I'm like legitimately mad at myself that it took me this long to start listening to her music. I'm definitely a person who doesn't listen to new artists that regularly. I feel like I listened to a lot of new people when I was like in high school, but now as an adult, I just listen to Taylor Swift, my MySpace emo playlists, and some random alternative music that I found like 5 years ago. So I don't really venture out, but I'm so glad I did. Something really did shift for me when I started to actually dive into Phoebe's music. I feel so refreshed as a human being when I listen to her stuff. Everything I'm gonna say, it's not me being dramatic or hyperbolic or anything, it's very genuine. I feel so grounded when I listen to her music. I feel so refreshed and I feel like myself. Let me explain. I know her music is sad, okay? Sad music doesn't actually ever make me sad, it just makes me feel chill. Don't psychoanalyze me, I'm okay. Like the guitar strumming, the chords, the tone of the voice, the type of lyrics, not the exact storyline, but the type of diction. There are certain things you listen to where you feel like yourself. You're like, yeah, these guitar chords, like this is me. You just align with it in a very specific way. Like her music is like realistically nourishing my soul in a way. Not like a direct sort of relatability. It's just more of an internal existential sort of relatability that I'm feeling. I honestly, I'm very grateful that I found her music because I haven't felt like this about music since high school. Okay, and I am a millennial, so it's been a second. I'm kind of frustrated because I can't describe it as eloquently as I want to. I'm sure Phoebe Bridgers could write some lyrics about this and describe it eloquently, but I just felt the need to say that. If you didn't skip this part, comment down below and let me know what artists have made you feel this way. So this song title is a setting. Scott Street is a setting. It's a place. When we have songs about a setting, I find it very helpful to think about whether this setting could be literal or a little bit more metaphorical. For instance, if we think about Scott Street as a literal place, that would mean that it is quite literally a street, right? And this street could be one that exists in the real world. Perhaps it's a street from the songwriter's life. Maybe they have memories associated with this street. Or it could be a street that exists in a fictional world. Even if Scott Street is a fictional street that is made up, I would still think about this as a literal setting because it is still a street. This would be in contrast to interpreting Scott Street as a metaphorical place. If we think about Scott Street more metaphorically, then perhaps it would be an internal state. Maybe when the protagonist, the main character of this song, is walking down Scott Street, maybe they're walking within their own mind, or maybe they're walking through a street that's in their soul, right? That would be a much more metaphorical viewpoint towards Scott Street. And that would mean Scott Street is representing a bigger idea. It still is a place, but it's a more intangible, ethereal, ambiguous sort of place. This is similar to how I interpreted the song Somewhere Only We Know by the band Keen. I will link it down below for you if you'd like to watch. In that song, I interpreted the place that only they knew, Somewhere Only We Know. I interpreted that more as a metaphorical internal place, as a place of memory, representing a moment in time. And I do want to say that Scott Street could also be a completely different type of metaphor that is not even representing a internal space. It could be a metaphor representing an experience the songwriter had, or a specific thought pattern that the songwriter wants to express. There are like literally infinite ways to think about this song. For me, I am thinking about this street as a literal street that actually exists. However, I do have a natural inclination to view things pretty metaphorically. And while I think that Scott Street exists, and I do think that the songwriter or the protagonist of this song has a very special connection to Scott Street, I do kind of view the act of the protagonist walking down Scott Street to be significant metaphorically. What kind of is evidence for me that this is important, the sound effects we have towards the end of the song, like the bike bell, we have like a trolley, we have all of those noises that you would hear when you're walking outside. That's obviously very intentional, but I think that's also very metaphorically significant. That brings forth possible transportation symbolism, which I'll discuss when we get there. So that's why I do feel like there are a lot of metaphorical undertones to this song, but I do think that Scott Street in this song is talking about an actual street. I would be really interested to hear your take on this. So make sure to comment down below if you think Scott Street is an actual street, or do you view it more as like a metaphorical internal place? Whenever we have a setting as the song title, I find it to be very interesting. We had this in the song Cornelia Street by Taylor Swift. We had this in the song Arcadia by Lana Del Rey. I analyzed both of them. I will link them down below for you. We oftentimes define ourselves in relation to places, and we subconsciously assign those settings to certain time periods in our lives. Scott Street, to this protagonist means the main character, has some sort of significance. Maybe it's a street in their hometown. Maybe they would always walk down the street, but they haven't been back in a while. We don't really know, right? We just know that it's significant for one reason or another. I feel like we, just as people, tend to define things for ourselves. I feel like Scott Street holds a particular definition for our protagonist. First one. There are a few different ways to interpret the first line. Walking Scott Street feeling like a stranger. So the protagonist could be feeling like a stranger in her current location on Scott Street. Maybe she hasn't been there in a while. And I'm using the pronoun she because I am just visualizing this through the perspective of Phoebe Bridgers, but we don't know that for sure. The protagonist could be literally anyone. When you go to a place you haven't been for a long time, everything is different. Everything feels foreign. So you feel like a stranger in the setting. Or perhaps the protagonist is feeling like a stranger to themselves. They don't know who they are right now as they're walking down the street. So it could be a more external sort of feeling like a stranger in relation to the external setting, or it could be an internal sort of feeling like a stranger, like in a more existential sort of way. And I do want to note that feeling like a stranger often does happen in relation to a setting after a long period of time has passed, but it could also happen instantaneously. If you have a change in perspective or an epiphany about something, or just have something happen that makes you view things through a different lens, in a snap of a finger, you can feel like a stranger to yourself, or your surroundings can feel foreign to you. There are a lot of different things that could have happened that could have led to the protagonist feeling like a stranger. It is important to recognize the protagonist has awareness of this feeling. With an open heart, open container. This lyric is really interesting to me. I am interpreting it as a juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is when things are set side by side for the purpose of comparison. I feel like an open heart and an open container have opposing connotations. An open heart to me is when someone is open to whatever is going to come their way. They're open to love, platonic or romantic. They just have like chill vibes, right? They're gonna go with the flow a little bit. They're gonna let destiny or fate take over and lead them to where they need to be, right? It's like a little bit free-spirited. That's how I would think about an open heart. And then we have open container. This is referring to an open container of alcohol. When you drink alcohol, you start to enter an altered state. When you're drunk or even when you're buzzed a little bit, you are not your baseline self. Your judgment starts to shift a little bit, your concentration starts to get a little bit hazy. But I feel like when you have an open heart, you're ready for whatever is gonna come to you, so you have more focus. When you have an open heart, I feel like you're very mindful of everything because you view things through more of an intentional way, like everything is happening with intention. So you are very much in the present moment. That sort of like concentration and mindfulness to me is in stark contrast to the connotation of an open container, because an open container will give rise to an altered state. When you're drunk, you don't really know what's going on around you. You might think you do, but you're literally wrong, right? So those two phrases have opposing energies. Whenever there is a juxtaposition like this, I usually interpret it as being reflective of a sort of unbalance present. And in this case, I would interpret it as an internal sort of unbalance for the protagonist, like an emotional sort of unbalance. There's like some opposing feelings or opposing thoughts going on subconsciously, maybe. Of course, this lyric could also just not be figurative, right? It could just literally be what happened. Not everything has to be figurative. I personally do tend to interpret things pretty metaphorically, but there's always a possibility that some things are just literal. They're just recounting an experience, or the lyrics are just meant to sound good to fit into the song. So there's different ways to interpret it, but I do like to provide different avenues of thought for you guys so you can come to your own conclusion. I've got a stack of mail and a tall can. It's a shower beer. It's a payment plan. The protagonist is carrying a stack of mail, like a Scott Street near her post office. Stack of mail could be literal. I'm kind of viewing it more literal, but if you want to view it in a figurative way, mail represents correspondence with the outside world, and she's in a very specific setting that she feels a stranger in. So you can think about the theme of like communication. When you feel like a stranger, you feel isolated. I also want to point out that the word stranger is part of this album, Stranger in the Alps. So it's kind of like the protagonist feeling isolated in a place, but also holding like, not the key, but holding, not a lifeline, but holding like a method of communication with other people outside of this street. That could be just an interesting dynamic present in the song. Mail could also represent just the mundane things that you do, like checking the mail, and how that's just a part of life. To me though, I'm not really thinking about mail in a figurative sense. You can if you want, that's completely valid. The tall can is referring to the open container of alcohol the protagonist is carrying. Says it's a shower beer, it's a payment plan. Payment plan, I believe, is referring to the stack of mail, like it's just bills or spam mail wanting to sign up for credit cards, things like that. A shower beer is like a beer that you drink in the shower. I did Google this because I was like, is that literally what it is? And according to the most ancient text, urbandictionary.com, that is in fact what it is. That to me connotes a feeling of chill vibes and also resourcefulness, right? Hashtag multitasking. This could be another instance of a juxtaposition because the connotation of a shower beer, which is more chill and just more like vibey, is in opposition to bills and mail that has payment plans, which is more serious and potentially stress inducing. So that is another instance of opposition. A shower beer, another way to think about it, I know I'm being a little bit overly analytical, but that's what we do on this channel. When you're in the shower, you are cleaning yourself, right? It's a sort of cleansing experience. And that also does bring forth a little bit of water imagery. It's not very explicit water imagery, but it's a feeling of being cleaned and cleansed. The protagonist is walking with the open container on the street. She's not like literally in the shower. So it's interesting that the phrase shower beer is used. Does the protagonist want to feel cleansed, like emotionally, internally? Is she perhaps drinking because she feels like a stranger and that's not comfortable to her? That's another possibility. Does she think that by drinking in this kind of not chill situation of her feeling like a stranger, does she think the beer will help cleanse her of that feeling she's having of feeling like a stranger? Those are all some possibilities. For me, I do think the protagonist just literally has a beer walking down the street, and I do think that she literally just has some mail she's carrying with her. However, I personally do view the juxtapositions that I mentioned in those two lines as significant and as being indicative of some unbalance internally for the protagonist. There's helicopters over my head every night when I go to bed. This could be literal, but I am interpreting this as more metaphorical. Helicopters flying overhead happens when there's a situation occurring, right? The police, sometimes like the weather or traffic, they're not going to be checking the weather or traffic at night usually. So I'm inclined to believe these are like police helicopters. That brings forth a feeling of urgency and of potential danger. It's an unsettled and an unbalanced situation. When it says that the helicopters are over the protagonist's head, it could just be setting context, like, oh, they're flying overhead. Or it could be more figurative, where it feels like metaphorical helicopters are flying around the protagonist's head inside. And that could be due to the thoughts that the protagonist is having. Maybe her thoughts are so urgent and so intense that they require law enforcement to intervene. And I don't mean in like a dangerous way, but I just mean in like a heavy way. They require some sort of urgent intervention. Perhaps the protagonist is having negative thoughts, thinking about things that are hurtful and heavy and are kind of like a crime to herself, because it's painful to think this way. That's how I am inclined to think about that lyric. It sounds like these thoughts are keeping the protagonist up, not allowing them to go to sleep. And there is a bit of a sound effect in the song as well when it says helicopters here. So it does make us pay a little bit more attention to that word, to that diction. I found that very interesting. I definitely do view that in a more metaphorical sense. Let me know if you view that more literal or metaphorical in the comments below. Spending money, and I earned it. When I'm lonely, that's when I'll burn it. Protagonists could be spending money while they're walking down Scott Street. I don't know what kind of street this is, if this is like a street with cute shops, or it could be like a more residential street. So they could be spending money on that street or just in general in their life. I think here the protagonist is saying, I earned the act of spending money. Like, I deserve to spend this money. When I'm lonely, that's when I'll burn it. They will burn the money. They will use it unwisely when they feel lonely. They have an awareness of this. This does show me that there are some internal things going on with the protagonist that are not super positive. Feeling lonely can be a very heavy feeling. Sometimes it's too painful to sit in the loneliness. You have to do something to try to cope with it. There are healthy coping mechanisms and not so healthy coping mechanisms. Spending money is not great to do just randomly when you're feeling lonely, but it's definitely not as bad as some other coping mechanisms out there. But the protagonist does have an awareness that they're gonna be doing something to try to get through that feeling of loneliness. And I do personally view this feeling of loneliness as being associated with the helicopters flying overhead for the protagonist. And again, I think they're metaphorical helicopters like inside. So far in this first verse, we have the protagonist feeling like a stranger, which feels very isolating and lonely. And then we have the helicopters overhead, which suggests that the protagonist's thoughts are not positive and that they're hurtful to them. And then we have the mention of loneliness literally. So the protagonist's internal space is not like super positive right now. They do appear to be in a little bit of pain. And then we have the two juxtapositions that I mentioned as well. So everything from this first verse makes me think that the protagonist is not in a good place emotionally right now. Chorus. This could be the protagonist talking directly to another person or talking to the other person in her mind, or it could be something that they're telling themselves. This could be like internal self-talk that is causing the helicopters above their head, right? So they could be asking themselves if they feel ashamed when they hear their own name. I personally don't think that the protagonist is saying this out loud. I feel like they're thinking about this in relation to another person. Like they're wondering if someone else feels ashamed when they think about them. Maybe someone has wronged the protagonist, so they feel shame when they think about the protagonist. That's kind of the train of thought that I have about that lyric. If you want to make this a little bit existential, the you here could be a collective you, as in like the world or like the universe maybe. Instead of addressing a specific person, like at specific person, it's like at world. do you feel ashamed or embarrassed of me? This could be due to like negative self-talk. I personally don't interpret it in this way, but I do want to point this out as a possibility because the protagonist does seem to be in an emotionally not chill state. And with the helicopter lyric we had, I do think it's possible that there is some negative self-talk going on with the protagonist. It's like the world is ashamed that the protagonist exists. This could be how the protagonist views themselves, and they are mirroring that outward into the world. I'm more inclined to think this is just about an ambiguous person that we don't know about. Let me know what you think down below. Verse 2. It sounds like the protagonist ran into another person while they were walking on Scott Street. However, you can also think about it as a completely separate memory, a completely separate occurrence. Maybe these verses are just vignettes of different moments in time. If this is a different memory, a different moment in time, it would be another memory where there is like a feeling of distance between the protagonist and their immediate surroundings. There is like the tiniest sliver of nostalgia, but it's not so much about nostalgia. It's more just about, I don't know, like the facts of life and of growing up. This song really does give me strong hometown vibes. The protagonist is visiting their hometown. That's why they feel like a stranger on Scott Street, because where there used to be a Barnes & Noble, there is now a McDonald's, and you're like, literally, what is happening? They run into someone that they haven't talked to in a while and they're having this conversation. That's how I like think about this song, just intuitively, but there are different ways to interpret it, and of course I don't know what Phoebe's own purpose is with this song. With my biases, that's what I'm thinking. In verse 2, we have the protagonist talking to someone. The protagonist is asking them about their sister and how, you know, they got their degree, they graduated from college, and the protagonist also made a comment about how that makes them feel old. The passage of time. I want to note that after Phoebe sings and that makes me feel old, there is like, I don't know, like a string instrument. I'm not like a music person. I literally just have a guitar in my garage that's been sitting there for 15 years that I never learned how to play. But there is like an instrument. It's like a string instrument or something. I don't think it's a violin, but maybe it's like the violin's cousin. Anyways, right after Phoebe sings and that makes me feel old, that instrument, please comment down below what it is if you know, comes in and it plays a very sad tune, right? It's very distinct and it makes me feel the way you would feel when you just sigh after you remember something that's emotional, but it's like a heavier sort of sigh. And the fact that that is so intentional makes me place even more significance on the instrumentals at the end of this song. I really love how the melody is kind of playing along with the emotions felt in the lyrics. It makes the song feel more alive, and funnily enough, it makes the song seem self-aware of itself. I know this is not like a novel thing, and I know that people do this very often, but I just really appreciate it, so I wanted to point it out. Again, this is not nostalgic. This is just like a realization of, oh, time exists. It is what it is. It's different than nostalgia because nostalgia has a very dangerous rose-colored lens associated with it. There is a very characteristic sort of heaviness that I associate with nostalgia. I do think the vibe of this song has a very tiny sliver, like a tiny sliver of an undercurrent of nostalgia. I do feel mildly nostalgic when I listen to it, but that's not the overarching feeling that I have. It's like refreshing and nostalgic at the same time. Like, I don't know how to describe it. I really do appreciate the directness of the lyrics, just telling us what happened. I find a lot of value in specificity. I say this all the time in my videos, how specificity brings forth relatability and intimacy in song lyrics. I really do value that. It makes it feel like a friend is telling you what happened in their day. There's a feeling of warmth that comes with specificity, and that's how you create writing where the reader feels like they're your friend. You feel a sense of closeness with the song. Another thing I talk about on this channel is that when there are literal things or direct statements made, it doesn't mean that there's an absence of emotion. It is often indicative of the presence of a lot of emotion previously. That was something I talked about a lot in my analysis of Taylor Swift's most terrifying song, in my opinion, called Right Where You Left Me. I will make sure to link every video that I mentioned description in case you'd like to watch. To me, there is a very deep emotional reason that these lyrics, these memories made it into this song. They probably elicited a very strong emotional response in the protagonist. This was a very important conversation to the protagonist for one reason or another. He said, "What does that make me?" So the person that the protagonist is talking to is older than them. That's a context clue. Also makes you chuckle in a kind of sad way. Again, the passage of time growing up. I asked you how is playing drums. You said it's too much to carry. So maybe she's talking to like her current drummer. Maybe that's a possibility, or maybe just another musician she knows. When the drummer says it's too much to carry, that to me is very figurative. Literally, a drum set contains of many parts, different cases, so you do have quite a bit to carry around, but I do think this is referring to a more emotional sort of thing you carry. Because you also carry your emotions with you literally everywhere you go. And what about the band? You said they're all getting married. Again, the passage of time, I think that's why I'm getting such hometown vibes from this song. It's like you are revisiting the past and everyone's at different places in their lives. The protagonist is asking about the band their friend is in, the drummer, and they said that, you know what, everyone in the band is getting married. They're concentrating on moving forward in a different direction right now. I have been watching some live performances of Scott Street because I love this song so much, and I noticed that the lyric here has been changed to "they're all having babies." That is a further sort of progression. You know, it's interesting how when you grow up, everyone's kind of in the same place. You're all in elementary school, you're all in middle school, you all know what's going to happen next, you're going to go to high school. But then after high school, people just go in different directions, right? Some people start working, some people take gap year, some people go straight to college. The older you get, the more like spread out people get. It branches out a lot. It is very weird because you have people that are like on their third kid and they have a mortgage, and then you have other people that don't even have a career picked out yet. They're still trying to find their passion. Even at the same age, they end up in different places, like literally, but also career-wise, economically, socially as well. That's the type of conversation I believe they're having here. So verse 2 is kind of like a catch-up with an old friend. There is definitely a bittersweet feeling to those types of conversations. It's nice to catch up with people, but it also really makes you see the passage of time and how isolating that is. Because again, people are at different places and they're in different mindsets. They're in different emotional states. This conversation in verse 2, although there is a little bit of warmth to it just because of the familiarity that the protagonist seems to have with this old friend, there is still a feeling of isolation present. Then we have repetition of the chorus where it says, "Do you feel ashamed when you hear my name?" I do want to say that the connotation of this chorus is a little bit different the second time it's repeated after verse 2, because in verse 2 we have a conversation with the protagonist's old friend. So when that chorus is repeated after that conversation, I'm more inclined to think that the protagonist is wondering if her friend that she had the conversation with feels shame towards her. This would suggest that maybe that friend did something to her that they regret. After the chorus here, we have what I'm referring to as some transcendent instrumentals. This is such a beautiful part of the song. I get in my feels a lot. It's like ethereal in an emo way, which I like respect a lot. First of all, this instrumental part, in addition to being very beautiful and ethereal and mildly emo, I think is reflective of the internal state of the protagonist. I think it is showing the inner turmoil that they're feeling, because I feel like this instrumental portion kind of has some stability, like with the drums in the background, especially towards the beginning, that keeps it steady. But then there's also a feeling of the music, the instrumentals, pushing you forward and pulling you back, and then you kind of oscillate in place as well, like emotionally, like through the instruments. I don't know like musical terms to express this more eloquently. I apologize, but that's how it makes me feel. It's kind of like a flux and flow sort of thing. It's like you're fighting your emotions within, right? And I think this is actually illustrated very beautifully in the music video for this song that I think I will eventually analyze, because I have a lot to say about that music video. I heard that maybe it is like based on a meme, but I don't know. I don't care. To me, it's very metaphorical and it makes me cry. So I think I'll eventually analyze that music video. Even in the portion of the music video where this instrumental is, the way that we see Phoebe look at the camera, the way the lighting is, there's so many things that are going on metaphorically that I think are very significant. But right now, just taking into account the music, not the video, I feel like the flux and flow type of vibe that this is eliciting represents a whirlwind of emotions, kind of like maybe a sea of emotions where there's a storm and there are waves. The waves are kind of, going in and pulling you back out. That's what I feel like this instrumental part is doing. At 3 minutes and 56 seconds, that's when the sound effects begin. And these sound effects really do bring in some transportation symbolism, in my opinion. Transportation in literature is very important. For example, trains are very important. I talked about train symbolism more in depth in my analysis of the song Champagne Problems by Taylor Swift. Very generally speaking, when you have modes of transportation, you could be going from one geographical place to another geographical place, but it can also be reflective of moving to a different internal place in your mind, in your emotions. It could suggest that you are departing a part of your life and arriving in a new part of your life. You're undergoing a life change of sorts. So transportation symbolism is very important, and we have multiple modes of transportation being referenced here instrumentally. I can't tell with certainty, but it sounds like, again, there's like a bike, there's like a trolley, there was like a train or something. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of noise, and all of these separate noises are reflective of a mode of transportation. And I don't know if this was the intention or not, but this is just literally how I feel. As the protagonist is saying, "Don't be a stranger," we hear the sound of all of these modes of transportation that will take people away from one another. They're all the ways that they can remain strangers. I'm viewing all of these modes of transportation as being departures. They're departing from where the protagonist is at. The protagonist is walking, and all of these modes of transportation are moving faster than her, right? So they're going past her in different directions, but none of them are staying with her. It just makes me align that sort of movement with the friendship that she's referring to, perhaps, or just thematically with how she's feeling. Like there's a lot of movement around her, but nothing is staying with her. Just like that conversation she had with her drummer friend. That conversation ended. Anyways, don't be a stranger. That was all that conversation came to. I get the sense that the protagonist would just be walking down Scott Street after that conversation, and I don't know why I have always visualized this as happening like at night. And then as they're walking away from their friend, after they said, "Anyway, don't be a stranger," if this was like a movie or something, the protagonist would be walking in slow motion, and all of these modes of transportation that we hear would be moving by in a very fast forwarded sort of way. Another thing that's very ironic is that there's so much sound, which makes you think that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people around, but I still get the sense that the protagonist is feeling isolated and they feel like a stranger. And sometimes when you get reminders of the passage of time, like the protagonist did in that conversation in verse 2, you feel like a stranger to yourself for a moment. You do. It can get kind of existential when you realize that time has passed and you're like, who was I then? Who am I now? Again, there are a lot of different ways to interpret everything, and at this point I'm just kind of throwing out ideas. Hopefully one of those resonates with you. I'm sure you all have your own unique ideas as well that I would love to hear about below in the comments. But yeah, those are some things that I think about when I hear this song. It's truly such an emotional song, and it's so exquisite. It's so exquisite. To me, it's just a very pure form of art because it makes me feel so many things. A lot of them are opposing things, but I feel them at the same time. Let me know what you think of the instrumental part of this song. How does it make you feel? Last verse. The last verse messes with me so much. First of all, I do want to note that in the last verse we have some background noises. We have what I think sounds like a bike bell, and then a train, and then a trolley bell, and then a bike horn. So it does sound like the protagonist is still walking down that street, which would lead me to believe that verse 2 is the protagonist running into her friend while she's walking on Scott Street. The sound effects also kind of make everything seem a little bit more chaotic, and perhaps that is reflective of the chaotic emotional state of the protagonist as well. The last verse is very emotional and very heavy in my opinion. It's really difficult to process a heavy and emotional moment when there are like bike horns and trains and trolley bells in the background. It kind of gives me a feeling of anxiety. Obviously the sound effects are intentional. I do think they contribute to like a bit of an anxious, chaotic ambiance to the last verse that is juxtaposed with a lot of heaviness. Like anxious energy, I don't feel like it's heavy. It's pretty light, but it's chaotic light and it can bring you down. Anxiety is like lightness and heaviness mixed in a very weird way. It's like oil and water vibes, but I think of this verse as being heavy in a different way. The word anyway messes with me a lot. Like a lot. The protagonist is feeling a lot of emotions walking down Scott Street. We discussed that in the first verse, all those juxtapositions, right? That conversation in verse 2 had this very bittersweet feeling of nostalgia and just the fact that time is passing by. Whoa, I'm an adult, OMG, literally what? 1999 was literally last year, what's happening? It's that vibe. And then the word anyway just like diminishes everything, every emotion that we just experienced, right? Kind of like a self-preservation sort of word. You are purposefully, maybe subconsciously, but still purposefully making everything seem more casual. You're kind of like writing it off as like a protective mechanism so you can feel a little bit more chill as you leave the situation. This is something that we do subconsciously because I feel like after that conversation, like I wouldn't feel like okay and chill. I wouldn't even feel like neutral. I would feel a little bit heavy. I would feel a little bit emotional. Anyway, don't be a stranger. We have repetition of that lyric. I always say that repetition signifies significance. Anyway, don't be a stranger. You know, that's something that a lot of people say. Sometimes they mean it, sometimes they don't. Sometimes when they mean it, they really hope the other person makes the effort because they're afraid that if they make the effort, it'll come off as needy or the other person doesn't really care. There's a lot of like emotions behind the phrase, don't be a stranger. Unfortunately, I think most of the times it's just something that people say doesn't have the value that it should have. But I would argue that a lot of times people actually mean it. The relationships, the friendships still don't progress. They still kind of are a stranger. They don't keep in touch. No KIT, no hags. Gen Z, comment down below, do y'all still write hags and kit in your yearbooks? Do y'all still have yearbooks? Let me know, I'm interested. The last lyric is just, don't be a stranger. I think that the connotation of anyway, don't be a stranger, and the last lyric, don't be a stranger, I think those connotations are different. When it says anyway, those two lyrics, it's part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. It's something that was said out loud. But I feel like the last lyric holds a lot more heaviness. And I think it's like the protagonist thinking that to themselves. It's like when you go inward and you say something to yourself because you really, really want it to be true. And it could be the protagonist telling herself not to be a stranger, but I think it's more likely it could be the protagonist kind of like hoping that the other person won't be a stranger. I'm kind of more partial towards that second interpretation, but I do think that both are valid. That last lyric to me is very vulnerable because I do view it as a protagonist saying it to themselves, like internally, kind of like hoping that the other person will keep reaching out and they won't be a stranger to them anymore. But we have this vulnerable moment kind of juxtaposed in the last verse with all of those sound effects in the background, right? That creates a feeling of unbalance, similar to the unbalance that we had in the two juxtapositions that I pointed out in the first verse. To sum up, so to me, this song is about a few different things. It's about existing in a not so positive emotional state. It's about acknowledgement of the passage of time. It's about moving forward in your life journey. I think those things are illustrated through the diction here, through the juxtapositions, which connote a feeling of unbalance, and also just through the storytelling, through the dialogue. I do think that the sound effects and the last verse are very important. They definitely contribute a feeling of chaos and unbalance to the song, which I think could very well be reflective of the protagonist's internal state. That's all I have for this song. Please tell me your thoughts down below. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed and to subscribe if you haven't already, if you want. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye!